All right, everybody. Let me get the recorder on. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Safely Extreme podcast, where we discuss game design and industry topics. I am Josh Bycer from Game Wisdom, and joining me from soon-to-be not Nexus Games, Sharky.
It's already not Nexus Games. Hello, everybody. Welcome. And hopefully soon I'll have the new studio name for us.
Mm-hmm.
How long have I been saying that for now?
It's the Blizzard soon. Or when it's done.
Yeah, when it's done.
All right, but we have another episode of our What is a Game series lined up for tonight. And we are going to be talking about what is a Metroidvania, as well as how it differentiates from action-adventure games. Because no one has ever asked the question, what is a Metroidvania, right? We're the first ones.
Yeah, I think we're the first ones, as long as asking what is a rogue and what is a platformer, which is not to be
Hmm.
confused with a platformer. We were also the first ones to ask that too.
Hmm. But this is going to be an interesting one. On our last show, we missed last week, but the one before that, the Shark was talking about how the genres that we were starting out the series with were very generalized. So stuff in a platformer kind of resonates with a lot of action games, and roguelikes resonate with RPGs and stuff like that. But with Metroidvanias and more specifically action adventure games, we're going to start to see this kind of more, I think, stricter definition of the mechanics and their genres here.
Yeah, because what we see in genres is kind of they fork and bleed down kind of thing. Basically, like you see like the core genres, and then a lot of core genres end up breeding, I guess you'd say, subgenres that end up breeding subgenres that end up bleeding subgenres and so on and so forth, kind of thing. And then there's a point to where, a genre might exist, but it doesn't even have a name, You go down far
Hmm.
enough.
Yeah. And with Metroidvania design in particular, this is where we get to some of the more, I'm not sure what the word I want to use, more stricter, I think, definitions when we talk about what is and what isn't. But before we get to that, I figure let's talk a little bit about action. What do you think, Char? Should we talk about action adventure or Metroidvania first?
Mm, I think Metrovania first,
Okay.
since that's the bigger one, the one we'll probably spend the more time on.
Hmm. So Metroidvania design, of course, as I'm sure everyone who has written an article about what is a Metroidvania will always go to, of course, Metroid and Castlevania, or more specifically, Symphony of the Night. And the definition of what is a Metroidvania, or what makes it such a very specific genre, is that it draws elements, well, at least most of them draw elements from 2D platforming. But what separates it is that there's a greater focus on character progression in a Metroidvania.
As
More
well as
specific,
level design.
yeah, more specifically with what the player is able to do. And this is what separates a Metroidvania from, say, a platformer, like in Mario. In a Mario game, Mario gets a variety of moves and abilities and, power ups and suits, but they are either A, limited time, you get hit, you lose the power, or B, you get all those jumps and that general tech from the very first moment. In a Metroidvania, upgrades are forever.
Progression.
Yeah, and they are progressing through the game. So you may start with just walking and jumping, but you'll get, of course, everyone's favorite, the double jump, wall jump, dashes, and special attacks. And it really is, in this case, like limited by your own creativity. As we saw with something like Axiom Verge, that gives you the ability to phase through solid objects and do that kind of like teleport dash through anything that you want.
Yeah, don't forget the triple dash and the infinite jet. I mean the triple
The
jump
infinite dash.
and the infinite jump. Yeah, it's really the progression. The progression is
Mm,
one of the main things that differentiates it from a platformer. Is the fact that you progress through the different moves as well as the level design, because the level design is built to fit that progression. Because the when you have the basically you have sections that cannot be reached without
mm,
certain powers. So that section could be right at the start, but you won't be able to get there until you get that upgrade power. And you don't really see that kind of thing with a platformer or platformer.
Hmm. And the progression itself is a very big point, and so is the pacing. When we talk about most platformers and most of the games that we've discussed in the series, you're going on a level by level basis. Once you've done level 2, you move to level 3. There's no reason for you to return to those previously revisited areas. With Metroidvania design, the world is open, and I use air quotes there because it's not in the same sense as an Assassin's Creed or a Grand Theft Auto,
I would
but
call
that
it a
you're,
semi-open world.
yeah, it's open in the sense that there aren't any, you must go to level 1 to then go to level 2 to go to level 3. It's more, here's a wide open space. Oh, you want to go over there? Well, there's a pit that you can't jump. It's too far. Or you need to get up this wall, but you don't have a wall jump ability. So you are naturally going to have to explore somewhere else. And then lo and behold, you'll find a double jump. Or you'll find, climbing boots or climbing gloves or anything like that. And then from there on, how your character moves and behaves is fundamentally changed. And one of the biggest points, or one of the biggest elements that you can tell that differentiates a Metroidvania from other games, is that when I'm starting in a Metroidvania to where I'm ending in one, these 2 points should be fundamentally different in terms of what I'm able to do.
Unless you
If
got
they're not,
Metroid.
what was that?
Unless you got Metroid.
Yeah, but then you get Metroid maybe like right here, but then you'll get all your powers eventually. The tricky thing, and something that Shark alluded to a few minutes ago, is that this is also built into the level design or the world design of a Metroidvania. That how the world challenges the player has to change. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of 3D based games typically don't go the Metroidvania route. Because obviously it's a lot harder to build a fully realized 3D space compared to a 2D one.
Yeah, and
And
when you're talking about platformers specifically, normally
mhm,
when you're talking about platformers, you're just going left to right. And, every once in a while, right to left, in some games. Where in a Metrovania, you're going in every different direction at, you know,
mhm,
constant change all the time because the maps like spiderweb out rather than just be linear left or right
mhm.
or mostly linear. There's some, a little bit less linear platformers, but most of them, pretty much all of them are fairly linear when you're talking about 2D platformers. But when you're talking about like a Metrovania, oh no, there is no linearity pretty much at all, except for maybe right at the beginning for tutorial purposes.
It's a kind of a false linearity with a Metroidvania. The game will
Mm-hmm.
never tell you you must go over here to then go over here to then go down here. What it does, it kind of builds it organically into the environment design. Oh, you can explore everywhere, but your moves are limited. So you are stopped by the design of the game, as opposed to, the game putting up a big old, toll bridge and saying, nope, you can't go this way yet.
Although I would say there's some better designs for Metrovanias that don't have that limitation, to where you can go anywhere at any point as long as you have one of a few different power ups, kind of thing. We've seen that in um other Sharks game. I'm forgetting the name.
Vision soft reset.
Vision Soft Reset, yeah. Because in
Yeah.
Vision Soft Reset, if you really knew how to use the powers, you could go to pretty much anywhere as long as you had like two or three different powers.
Hmm. And this also gets into the concept of sequence breaking, where if you're good enough, you can go to an area that you normally aren't supposed to get to just yet. And this was, of course, made famous by Super Metroid. And if you've watched any HDQ runs or the Summer Games, or whatever their different names are, of people who play Super Metroid at that level. You can do an 80% run, you can do a low percent run. I've seen people do a percent run, a reverse boss order run. And it really comes down to how you build the various abilities in your game. And that I think is a really good segue into this point. And what separates a good Metroidvania from a bad one? And good Metroidvania design is about introducing elements that change the player's abilities, that give them more things that they can do, which in turn lets them explore more of the world. Bad Metroidvania design, or not so good, is that they just give you what we call keys. So this is an ability or a power that its only purpose is to essentially unlock the next area, and then it's never really used again, or it never really changes what the player is doing. So, an example would be, let's say you unlock the ability to shoot red bullets instead of green bullets. They don't do any more damage, they don't change anything in the world, they just open up red doors instead of green doors.
I think that putting the keys in there is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's bad if you have to really, it that's all you get kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
like uh like for example, if somebody were to put that as an upgrade and you were to get another upgrade not too far after that, that was a, real upgrade kind of thing, that wouldn't be bad. I don't think the inclusion of them is bad. I think just the exclusion of the good upgrades is bad, and of
Hmm.
course, the amount of them.
Yeah, but you can have, a very famous example are health upgrades. Oh, is my stream still? Because I'm seeing like my connection kind of like fluctuate in the bottom right.
Yeah, it's still up.
I wonder if it's OBS or maybe there's a storm coming. But
Is that the start of Terminator?
yeah, probably. But the point is that you can have like general health upgrades, more special meteor upgrades, stuff like that. But that can't be it in your Metroidvania. Likewise, you can't introduce a power that its only purpose is to solve one situation. So this would be like in the Tomb Raider game or the Tomb Raider reboots. They give one of the things that you get is the rope arrow. And the rope arrow only has one purpose to open up doors or barricades where there's a just so happens to be a giant rope that you can attach your arrow to. It's never used anywhere else. It has no combat purpose. It's just literally there to open these specific doors on the map.
That would be awesome to have a combat purpose behind that one. Because
Yeah,
you do a scorpion, get over here.
exactly. And this is again why Metroidvania design becomes it's a lot harder than I think a lot of people give credit for in terms of making a good one. That you not only need to build a character that's engaging from the very first moment, you also need to think about how that character is going to grow over however long your game is going to be. And then the third point, you have to build the world to compensate for that.
Mm,
Because if the world doesn't change, what's the point of having all these cool powers?
yeah. I think when you're talking about Metroidvania and the level design and everything, you kind of do it the same way you do a survival game, and you have different biomes kind of thing in
Hmm.
each part of the map kind of thing that really, not necessarily changes the level design. I mean, you're going to do that, in your level design itself, but changes the appearance of it, and some, maybe traps, are different, enemies are different in the biome, that kind of thing. All the normal biome stuff. But like it's enough to give you a different feel that you're in a different location, while then you put through, level design, in the way that
Hmm.
you're trying to map things out in Metroidvania where some sections you can access with this power, some sections you can access with this power. But I always I gotta go back to Visions of Reset. I really like the fact that it was designed in such a way that you don't have a linear path. You know, if you know what you're doing, kind of thing, you can, you know, really go a lot of different ways without getting all the powers. And
Mm-hmm.
I really like that design method. And, you
And
know, one thing that's key to that is designing all your powers and everything first. Before you do any level designing, have your character in a, you know,
mm-hmm.
a basic flat room, you know, maybe put a couple walls in, you know, and just, oh, excuse me, have your character be able to run around, jump, play around in that very basic room with no real level design and be able to have fun with the movement. If you can get the movement fun, the
Mm-hmm.
design is already, you know, well on its way. You know, it's, you know, because that is like the most key aspect to a Metroidvania.
Mm-hmm. We also saw something with that with Unsighted that I just played. Again, it's a game that allows you to literally play in reverse order. And there are several ways that you can sequence break through it. And again, all that comes from really building the world around what you know the player can do with those abilities. With Vision Solvery said, when I spoke with other Shark on the chat, I remember we asked him about, the fact that when you're jumping and you shoot down while you're jumping, it kind of gives your character like a little extra height. And that allows you to sequence break in a few spots. I asked him if that was intentional, and he said, yeah, it was. Like, he wanted that to be an option for how you control that character. And that is where we kind of get from, it's like the difference between, like, here's like the lower quality Metroidvanias, here are the good ones, and then these are like the exemplary ones. When you can design abilities or the character to have multiple utility that lets you do things or skip content. Because we've seen like some really good Metroidvanias, but they're still very linear in their approach. That you do have to do, go to area 1, to then go over to area 2, to then do area 3. And there's no way you can get around that. There may be like a few sequence breaks here and there, but it's not like you can, go where you want.
Right. And one of the sins that we see often in Metroidvanias is tons and tons of backtracking. I mean, like a little bit of backtracking is fine. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's you know made better with fast travel. You know, and but like when you just like you go all the way across the map from one side to the other to get item say 5 so that then you can go all the way back to where you came from just to use it into a thing to realize that once you get into that thing you got to go all the way back to where item 5 was and then you got to go all the way back and you're just going across the map like 20 times to do
Mm-hmm.
something that like if the two locations were next to each other it would take like 20-30 seconds to do. But since they're completely like 20 minutes, 30 minutes across the game, it takes like 5 hours to do that thing that, and you're just wasting the player's time at that point. And you don't want to waste the player's time because, number one, that's going to get them to quit the game. That's going to get them to refund the game. That's going to get them to badmouth your game. That's going to get all kinds of negative, input from consumers. But not only that, but you're in theory doing this to make the length of your game longer. And I've said this many times, the length of your game isn't how many hours somebody can put in it. It's the point when somebody quits the game. the point where they churn. So if there's a possible million hours somebody can put in this game, but they quit after minute 5, you have a 5 minute long game. If they quit
Mhm.
after 10 hours, you have a 10 hour long game. Because in the end, the total possible time that they can spend on it matters nothing. What matters is how
Mhm.
long they play it. And
Yeah.
the key is that you're not wasting players' time and you're giving them good engaging content all the way through.
Mhm. And we did play a Metroidvania that I think I've already forgotten the name of it. That was just that. That I had to literally go over here to get the power, to then go back over here to then use it, to then realize that, oh, now that I have this, I can go back over here and use it to get through a door.
Wasn't that Tales of Bycer?
Could have been. Yeah, I think it was. And again, you don't want to pad out your time like this. Especially, and this is the other point, a lot of lesser Metroidvania games, their level designs are very flat. What I mean is that if I have to start over here and I have to go over here, let's say the path is just there. It's just a straight line. So every time I go from here to here, I am repeating the same thing again and again and again. In a good Metroidvania, the level design affords multiple routes based on what the player can do. So one of the more famous or one of the more easier explain examples is with a double jump. Okay, suddenly these platforms that were too high for me to cross earlier, I can now get up there. And lo and behold, this is a far quicker way to do what I just did, walking from left to right. And this is what we talk about with the evolution of the level design. That you want the player to have multiple routes. You want it to feel like the world is changing to meet what the player can do. It doesn't matter if I can do double jumping and spring jumping and rocket jumping or any other kind of jumping if there's no reason to do all that jumping.
Yep. Your level design needs to fit your powers. Your powers need to fit your level design, and your powers need to feel really good in a closed room.
Hmm. And again, they have to fit with what the player can do in that space. It doesn't matter if you create these crazy abilities if they're never really utilized or ever needed to be utilized.
Yeah, that's
And
like a the equivalent of that would be a platformer or a plateformer as you're running along and it's just a flat strip of land. There's no actual
mhm,
platforms in a platformer. Just a steady strip of land, no pitfalls, no nothing. Just steady strip of land all the way across, and there's an occasional enemy coming across. We've seen that many times.
mhm. And again, the world design should accommodate these multiple routes. And this also affects how the world behaves or how the world challenges the player. That when you're in the earlier biomes or the earlier areas, stuff that would require additional abilities, additional powers, whatever, are oftentimes optional. Yes, you could get that health upgrade up there, but you need a double jump. When we get, let's say, 3, 4 biomes in, when the double jump has been fully unlocked, you're going to be double jumping as your normal way of making it through. And this is how these games will kind of grow their complexity. That the earlier areas, you're not going to really need to do all that much in terms of different skills. When you get to, let's say, the White Palace and Hollow Knight, you're going to use every single tech that's in that game if you want to stand a chance to get through it.
Hmm. It's you you really want, I think, at least most of the power ups. The non key type power ups. You want them to feel really good and meaty and in your player's hands. You
Mm-hmm.
want them to feel like they're getting they just got a major power up. You know, it's like, you know, essentially you can think of it as like superpowers kind of thing. Like you know, every upgrade you get is a new superpower. You know, one, you know, first upgrade maybe they can, you know, you know, web swing like Spider-Man. Next one, you know, maybe they can, you know, pop out claws like Wolverine. You know, next one maybe they, you know, fire blast like Cyclops. You know, whatever it is. You know, maybe next one they could teleport like Nightcrawler. And like the power ups need to feel good and meaty, and they need to really mesh with the theme you're going with, as well as with the level design itself. Everything has to
Yeah.
mesh together. The meshing of a Metroidvania is probably more important than almost any other genre. I mean, it's
Hmm.
important in all genres, but it's probably more important in Metroidvanias than any others.
Yeah. And another thing you want to watch out for
Watch out.
is, yeah, having powers that supersede other abilities that you've given the player. Because you want to make everything have a purpose. Like if you give the player the ability to, let's say, climb an edge, something that seems so basic, but many Metroidvanians make that as one of your actual powers. And then you give the player the ability to quadruple jump or infinite jump. Edge climbing is never needed ever again. It's basically like turning a power up into just a minor tool. This was one of the reasons why the later Saints Row games just never really worked for me. That once they introduced super jumping and flying, what's the point of driving any vehicle in that game? It's it's just there kind of just to check it off on the just to check off the box, but you're not going to really use that. If you want to make a Metroidvania work, every power that you're going to put in needs to have a credible purpose.
Mm-hmm. And you got to think of them as tools, and you don't want to have any tools make any other tools worthless. You don't want to,
Hmm.
you know, like for example, you know, some tools that are similar but they don't outdate each other, like a
Hmm.
hammer and a jackhammer. You know, you wouldn't want to use a jackhammer to put a nail in a piece of wood, you know, obviously,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't want to use a hammer to try to jackhammer, you know, out concrete, but they are kind of in the same family because they both hit stuff really hard, you know, kind of thing. But you know, they're still have their specific uses, kind of thing. That's fine. Doing stuff like that is fine. What you don't want to do is, you know, create a hammer and then create a slightly bigger hammer that does the exact same thing. I
This is
think
what
there
we
is
talk
a
about,
couple
like
exceptions
idle.
for that. You know, like you can replace double jump with triple jump, and you can, you know, replace triple jump with quad jump and infinite jump and whatnot. But you know, you don't want to outdate other tech because, like, if you had an infinite jump or whatever, and you had like a grappling hook, the grappling hook is useless now. You know,
Yeah,
you don't want to make your power ups useless.
yeah, and that's when we get into the idea of scaling when it comes to like idle design. You're making 1,000 resources, now you're making 100,000 resources. Nothing is really changing, it's just numbers going up. And we've seen some Metroidvanias do that. Like, oh no, you found the wall that's made out of, green stone instead of white stone, so your hammer is not going to work. You need, the super hammer. And then you need the ultra hammer. Then you need the super ultra hammer. And we just keep repeating this again and again.
I guess it's hammer time.
Yeah, exactly. And Metroidvania gameplay, again, in this aspect, you have to be willing to grow the world around, as well as grow the player's own move sets. And I want to return to the point about 3D games because it's very hard to find legitimate examples of 3D Metroidvanias, with exception to the Metroid Prime trilogy. That when most games introduce abilities, it's always done in a linear fashion. That if I get a new power on stage 3, well, that new power serves no purpose for stages 1 and 2. It will obviously be used going forward, but then that is just simply an upgrade. And this is again what we see and why it's kind of hard to differentiate action adventure games from Metroidvania design. That action adventure games love to introduce new weapons and new moves and new upgrades after a boss. But again, if the world is not being built around this, if it's still just a linear fashion going from A to B to C, it's not really considered a Metroidvania.
Yeah, although in action adventure games, you can still take those moves back to a previous stage and have an easier time at it generally.
hmm But if the world is not really built to compensate for it,
Hmm.
and again, just giving you new attacks is definitely not Metroidvania gameplay, because new attacks is just again variations of the same theme. You can do a horizontal attack. Now you can do a vertical attack. Now you can do, a charge attack. It's still just attacking. What we want to see is, well, you can jump. Now you can double jump. Now you can do an air dash. Now you can do a move that grants you iframes. Now you can do something that lets you, run up walls and then, hover to get across to new areas.
Yeah, there's all kinds of cool movement tech as well as just cool tech in general that you can have in a Metroidvania. And when we talk about Metroidvania, there's a good bit of moves that you want to be just movement tech as well as you want a good bit of move to be attack tech because like you have your double jumps, you have your wall climbs, you have your grappling hooks, you have infinite jumps, you have dashes, you have you know one that blurs in between there, and that would be the charge attack. You have all this different movement, tech, and then you have like attack tech where you're shooting your normal gun that you can have, infinite bullets on, but it's weak. Where
hmm
you have like your rocket launcher that has a long distance and massive damage, but it takes a long time to recharge, or you have to find ammo for it, and it's
Yeah.
very limited. And like, or you have like your you know, let's say saw blade attack where you throw out a saw blade and it does damage, but only in a arc kind
Yeah.
of thing.
And a really smart example of having these different abilities kind of work in unison was a robot named Fight, which I think is one of the I can't even other games that have done this as a roguelike Metroidvania. And how that game worked was you had an established route. You would start up here on the map, and you had kind of like Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4, Zone 5. What the game did was it gave you different powers that were all categorized by their utility. So let's say you need to reach a platform above you. So one of those options would be a double jump. In another version, or another option you could get in the game would be reverse gravity. Another way you could get is kind of the screw attack from Metroid, and even a jetpack. So the game had at least 3 to 4 different solutions for every problem, and you would always get one of those solutions per run. So it's not like every run of the robot named Fight, I'm gonna get double jump. Maybe one time I'm gonna get a jetpack. Maybe another time I'll get a grapple hook or something else. Maybe one time I'll get, the turn to the morph ball. Maybe I'll get a slide. So each
The
time I
jetpack
play
sounds
the
OP.
game, well, it's limited though. It has a limited fuel. A gravity jump is OP. I just reverse gravity and just fly up, and I don't have to worry about anything.
Unless there's spikes up there.
hmm But the point is, your path through this game. One second. Excuse me. Your path through the game is the same, but how you do it on each run is completely different. And this is a different kind of approach that Dead Cells did. Because many people consider Dead Cells to be a Metroidvania roguelike. But I don't know if I would classify it as well as a robot named Fight. Because the world just feels... It just felt very flat to me
Yeah,
after like 5 or 6 runs.
yeah, the world didn't really change. The layout changed, but the world didn't change.
hmm
You were still in the same biome. You were, still uh, facing the same enemies. The only difference was where is what.
hmm
It's doesn't really change anything. So like
hmm
a lot of the rogue elements in there was pretty useless, to be honest. And
Yeah, and
you know
it it
the
felt like keys again.
y- yeah, and you had to go, and it was also so grindy to where you had to go and
hmm
get on all these unlocks kind of thing. And then even then you couldn't even necessarily pick what you wanted out of your unlocks kind of thing. And it
hmm
it didn't feel good in a lot of ways. Like I
hmm
when I first started playing it, and I got a key to that free from the developers not long before the
hmm
game even released, and I was enjoying the hell out of it at first. Like I loved it, but
hmm
after a few runs,
mm
I put it down and never touched it again.
Yeah, and like it runs into I think that problem. Well, my voice is really dying today. It runs into that problem of I think it front loads the gameplay too much. And what I mean by that is that the initial control of your character in Dead Cells is amazing. He's very reactive. He has a lot of different options available to him. But then the problem turns into where do you go from there? And their answer, unfortunately, was just introduce these keys, like the vine ability, that you
Hmm.
can create these vines that let you climb up, but only at these specific points, which just so happen to be, the next major kind of area transition. So
Yeah.
it didn't really, lend itself into the level design. And
And then they also had so many items that just outdated each other. This is
Mhm,
the blood dagger. This is blood dagger number 2. This is blood dagger number 3. This is blood dagger number 4. This is dagger number 5. And they were all the exact same, just with higher different numbers.
yeah, I think this is where gunfire really excelled in that you had that variety of guns, but not only did you differentiate each gun from each other, but then the modifiers would fundamentally change how those guns would behave. You get something like +1 projectile on a rocket launcher, and then all of a sudden, that's a very different rocket launcher you're using.
Hmm.
But to bring this back to kind of the Metroidvania aspect, that you need to be able to provide a space that makes use of these powers, and you also need to make sure that the powers can actually do something there. And you, as another important trap that I see developers fall into, you also don't want to make the beginning of your game horrible. And what I mean by that is version 1 of your character, you walk very slowly. You may not even be able to jump. Some I've seen some indie titles have gone with, your first upgrade in a Metroidvania is the power to jump.
Have you
Because
seen like ones where the first upgrade is the power to walk?
I'm pretty sure we've seen those, or the power to run, or the power to actually see your UI. You don't, like, going back to what Shark said earlier, you don't want your amazing 30-hour long Metroidvania to start with 2 hours of grindy, horrible gameplay, or 10 minutes of grindy, horrible gameplay.
Now it'd be hard if you got that if you went through that stuff fast,
Hmm.
like in the first few minutes kind of thing, you could be like you're a robot, and then kind of go like Ultron did kind of thing, and like you first upgrade yourself so you can walk, and then you start walking, and then you upgrade your legs so that you can run, and then you
Hmm.
upgrade your intelligence and this, that, and the other, and you keep on upgrading yourself like and over like 10, 15 minutes kind of thing, you've gone from something that couldn't do anything to something that can do a lot of things.
Yep, and this is often why when Metroidvania start out like that, they will very quickly introduce your bread and butter abilities. That if your whole game is going to be on grappling, well, we're going to give you that grapple probably within 2 minutes of starting your game. If your game's going to be about different kinds of jump tech, we're going to give you that very fast. And to Smoke's question, that can work. We've seen this also be used as kind of a offhand tutorial. That we're going to give you all your crazy powers, we're going to let you run through the tutorial with them, and then somebody comes along and punches you in the face and you lose all your powers.
Yeah, it's also good for can be good for a hook at the beginning.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you don't want to depend on something like that. Not saying that you don't want to use it necessarily. You don't want to depend on it because you know, you want the game to be good enough when, somebody hits you in the face and you lose all your powers. You want the gameplay at that point to still be very, very engaging. You don't want it to be boring or grindy or anything else because you don't
Hmm.
want any part of your game to be like that. And losing all your powers is not a reason for that. So you need to have enough powers that keep the game engaging. And that all depends on your game to what is enough powers, as well as what is a Metrovania. Yeah.
Hmm. Yep. And keeping the player engaged through these early points is very important. You also, again, want to avoid having powers that fix complaints with your
Oh,
game.
oh yeah.
Because, like, again, like, I will, this is one of those hills I will die on. That I think Hollow Knight's beginning and general systems don't work when it comes to the mapping. That you need to spend one of your precious trinket or whatever they're called, whatever the various things you can pull into your character points, just so you get basic mapping done. You don't want to introduce a power or a feature that's only point is to remove a pain point that's in your game.
I mean, you could
Such
do a
as,
no map run.
yeah. And again, another point is that these things also they don't bother expert players. Again, somebody who has mastered Hollow Knight does not need the full mapping, but it is a pain if you're trying to play the game casually. And I would say that was one of the reasons for a lot of the churn in the first hour of Hollow Knight.
Probably.
Hmm.
So we're gonna mark the gravestone on the top of the hill for you now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure again a lot of people when I did my completion critiques on Hollow Knight gave up because of that. Again, you don't want to make things worse when you're starting out. You
Mm-hmm.
want to make the game feel great and then elevate it from there. And that's, again, why Ori was such a fantastic Metroidvania. That you start playing that game, it feels great to control that character, and it only grows from there.
Yeah, Ori starts out with more powers than some Metroidvanias even finished with,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just gets insane from there. And
Mm-hmm.
Ori is a very good example of a very good Metroidvania. It's a little bit too
Mm-hmm.
hardcore for my taste.
It does hit, I think, a few trickier spots. Like, I don't know if it reaches Hollow Knight difficulty, but it's in like that same neighborhood, I think, by the end of Ori, especially in the first Ori.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to concern yourself with just how many powers and moves and stuff you give the player, because you're still limited by, how many buttons on your gamepad. You don't want to give the player 30 different powers and have to assign 30 different moves to 4 buttons.
Unless you limit it to where they can only have 4 powers at once, and then they have to select between it.
But if you're going to do that, you better make that very easy and streamlined. This is a complaint that I had with Bloodstain, that you have to set up your powers beforehand, and there is a button that lets you swap it, but it just felt very annoying to go in the menu, find the power, assign it, go back out. Oh, but now I need this power. So let me go back in, swap it around, do it all over again.
I think the key to that is having, is in the level design and not requiring you to have like 20 different powers within 20 seconds.
Yeah, like you don't want it to be like, I'm going to take a step forward. Oh no, I need flight power. Okay, I did that. Oh no, now I need spike immunity. Let me do that. Oh no, now I need wing power again. Let me swap out into that.
Yeah, and I mean, biomes could really play into that because you could have
Yeah,
like,
this is a
maybe
fiery bio.
across a biome, maybe there's only maybe 8 powers that you need for that entire biome kind of thing. So, you swap, you set 4 and you're good for a while. And then you set, as long as you set the right 4, and then you may trade out one every once in a while kind of thing, rather than you don't want a constant trading out of powers kind of thing. And maybe what you do is set a more universal power kind of thing to one button kind of
Hmm.
thing, and then you have the 3 others changeable. That way,
Hmm.
of course, you can also use shoulder buttons and triggers and all that other stuff too to help with that.
Yeah, some games will make them situational, so that you have one button, and let's say whatever you use that button on in the environment would trigger a different power. So that let's say there's a blue orb that every time I grab it, I gain super speed. But then let's say I go and grab a red orb, now I have fire immunity. It's a way of streamlining your UI and making it so that you don't need, 60 different commands that tie to your gamepad.
Yeah, you gotta definitely put some good UX design in there
Hmm.
because the thing about good UX design is number one, you want to try to avoid having more than 3 clicks to do anything in the game, to do any one action, and you want to make it where it takes as few as clicks as possible at any point, which includes a level design of constantly switching out powers. You don't want to force constantly switching out powers. You want to streamline it in such a way that, because the UI is not the game. The UI is something that can get in the way of the game very easily. And the good UX design is keeping the UI out of the way of the players.
Hmm. And you want to have those context sensitive cases when there is only one option that actually works. But you won't be careful if you try to tie too much to the same command. Such as there's this game that I played, I think it was a Voldus Story, Abyss something, where they tied your dash to just like a general command to just like double tapping. But it's a game where you're moving around so quickly that it's very easy to trigger the dash when you don't want. And there's a cooldown on that because the dash is also your primary defensive move. So it's very easy to get in that case where you're accidentally hitting the wrong button. When I played that game, Grow Song on the Evertree last week on the Indie Spotlight, they give you 8 different tools that you have to cycle through one at a time, but the tools are context sensitive. So why do I need to waste a few seconds to select, my watering can from my sickle when you're never going to use the watering can on cutting on weeds and you're never going to use the sickle to water your plants? Just
I think
reduce them.
Stardew Valley could take advantage of some of that stuff
Definitely. That
because
is one of my biggest pet peeves for any kind of slice of life sim style game.
I love Stardew Valley, but it was really annoying having to like constantly swap out stuff when you're trying to water your plants and whatnot. You had to first break out the hoe, hoe the land, and then you had to, I think, what you had to cut. No, you
Uh,
had to cut weeds, and then you had to hoe, and then you had to
put
plant
the
the seed,
seeds
and then you
in.
had to water it, and
Hmm.
you had to click the UI so many times to do that. And there is definitely a way they could have streamlined that better. I love the game, but they could have definitely improved things on that area.
Hmm. And again, if you're trying to make a Metroidvania work, you want to remove as many things that keep the player from playing the game as possible. You don't want to have them keep constantly going to the menu. You don't want them to have to, keep checking on things over and over again.
I mean, what they could have done is like just inserted garden tools. Like once you get the jug and the hoe, and it would just combine into garden tools, and you would just have to click that, and that would both hoe and water, and also let you. I don't know. I can't remember. Did it let you water it before you planted things? I think it did.
I think so. I think you could water the ground and then put something in there.
Yeah, so like if they put those, if they let you combine those into gardening tools, the hoe and the watering jug, then you could just, hoe, water jug, hoe, water jug really quickly instead of having to swap back and forth, and then you come back and swap to your seeds, and then you plant all those. And it would have
Hmm.
been far more efficient, far more out of the way UX wise.
Yep. So, as a quick time check, we are approaching an hour in terms of our stream. Anything else regarding Metroidvanias that we did not discuss yet?
Not that I can think of. We need to move on to the action adventure, I think it is.
Trying to think if there's anything else. So, actually, as a question for the chat, if you're watching this live or recorded, besides the Metroid Prime trilogy, can you think of a 3D based game that went with the Metroidvania route? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah,
So,
3D Metrovanias are rare. That
hmm
especially the ones that work out well.
oh yes,
But
and no one
action,
say it is Super Mario Odyssey a Metroidvania.
I
Someone will say that. I can feel it. All
thought
right,
it was
but
a platformer.
mhm. It's a Metroidvania platformer. Remember, like with my thumbnail, any game can be a Metroidvania. It's the Schrodinger's cat of game design. Every game is or is not a Metroidvania.
Final Fantasy, it's Metrovania.
Yep. So
Call of
is
Duty is Metrovania.
Gone Home is one too. You don't start with a flashlight, you get a flashlight. There's an upgrade. We're done. We did
Yep.
it. But action adventure. This is again when we talked about action games last week. This is kind of the general evolution of the action genre that is about instilling more kind of RPG or abstracted elements into the game. And the reason why we included it this week when we talk about Metroidvanias is that it's really like a different side or a different slice of that kind of upgrade system.
Yeah,
That
it has a lot in common with the Metrovania. They're very much run a lot of
mhm,
parallels
you
because
get different upgrades, your
uh,
character changes,
you still
but
have movement and such, like
Mm-hmm.
movement tech and such, often like a Metroidvania.
Mm-hmm.
You exactly board. You have all the different like every everything. The real difference between a Metrovania and a action adventure game is the level design and generally the focus on combat, because
Mm-hmm.
action adventure focuses heavy on combat kind of thing, where the action adventure does not. The action or the Metrovania does not. The Metrovania um, focuses more on the platforming side. So like if you were to think of it as, a Metrovania is a action game, bred with a platformer, that's kind of where we're at. And where, the event action adventure is also that, but the big difference is that Metrovanias favor the side of platforming, where action adventure favors the side of action.
I would also like to make that a little bit more clearer that Metroidvanias are more about the exploration and the mechanics that go into exploration, with combat as secondary. Whereas action adventure, combat is first, and exploration is oftentimes secondary to that.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said earlier, there are a lot, and a whole lot, of action adventure games that fall into kind of this very same archetype. That you're going to go around, oh no, there's a door or a gap that I can't get through. Let me go over here and get this power that is only used to get through this specific kind of gap and never use anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And
That would be the same
what,
keys in Metrovanias,
yeah.
in the bad
And,
Metrovanias.
and typically, action adventure games, they don't necessarily introduce new progression based elements, but will oftentimes focus on passive upgrades. That, the ubiquitous skill tree, where it's just, all these different perks, and it's all just, again, very small variations. This perk lets you do 2% more damage. This perk lets you do 2.5% more damage. This one lets you do 4% more damage. And we just keep going
Ooh.
up and up and up.
Ew. Wait till we get to
It's an
the ultimate
RPG.
level. We're gonna do 7% more damage.
Yeah. And that's why Call of Duty is an RPG, just like Final Fantasy.
Exactly.
And the greater adoption of RPG elements into action adventure design is one of those things that really changed the genre, really differentiate itself from kind of the pure action games. And even like from the Souls links as well.
Yeah. It, one of my favorite action adventure games has to be Devil May Cry 3. I love that game. The the movement tech in that game is just so awesome. Like when you don't just have the jumps and all this other stuff, dashes, but you have it where you can knock an enemy on the floor and then you jump on their back and then you're riding them around like a dang skateboard, and it's freaking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And like you ride them around as a skateboard, and meanwhile you're shooting them with their guns, slashing them with your sword, whatever it is. You'll I think you could even ride them up on ramps kind of thing and jump off while shooting. And like you could
Mm-hmm.
do all kinds of crazy stuff. And like, you know, I think that, kind of the kings of the, action adventure genre are, Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. I think would
Mm-hmm.
probably be the kings of that genre.
Yeah. And when we talk about like a lot of the action adventure games, this is where we see those elements that we talked about in platformers. That there's a lot of jumping, there's a lot of moving around in them. But unlike a platformer, unlike a Metroidvania, the jumping is simply just like your mode of transportation to the next fight. It's not the game is testing you, or the level design is set up to challenge you with jumping. And like this is one of the things that got me with the later or with the Tomb Raider reboot. That outside of the temples, everything is just very, theme parkish in terms of what you're supposed to do. Oh no, I need to, cross this gap. But thankfully, there's these painted, skid marks on every wall for me to jump across. Or, the ledge is perfectly highlighted, so that means I have to use my grapple hook here or my grapple arrow. But then the grapple arrow can't be used over here because, the glowy bit is not up there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we were talking about earlier when it came to keys. That if you introduce a power that its only purpose is to solve a problem, that's not really changing how you play the game. It's just opening up a door that you couldn't get to, 2 hours ago.
Yeah. But with Devil May Cry, they don't really do that because, like, at least for the most part that I can think of, because I mean most of those levels in Devil May Cry there's nothing inaccessible to it outside of not being able to beat the enemies to break the seals to go to the next area.
Mm-hmm.
There are some more elaborate areas, but I don't think they did anything like that in those areas.
Yeah. And if they introduce a new power, again, that power would basically be used to not only get through the area, but then will be adopted into the other areas, such as when you get what was it? I think you did get like some kind of like grapple ability, or I know you got like a
I
little
think that
bit of
was
movement
in
tech.
Devil May Cry 4. I think there might have been a
Yeah.
grapple ability for what's his name? Uh,
Nero?
yeah, Nero.
Yeah. So, and again, this is why action adventure is not really considered a Metroidvania, even though it does have several similarities to it.
A lot of
That-
similarities.
yeah. That you can introduce new weapons and new abilities that will aid you in your game. But if their only purpose is to move the world along, but not really have anything else to it, then it's not really a Metroidvania. And again, one of the reasons why Metroidvania design is so specific is that it's really about the obstacle design, the environmental design, more so than just, throwing bigger and badder enemies at the player.
Yeah, where action adventure is focused on combat first and foremost.
Bigger and badder enemies.
Yeah, bigger, better enemies, different types of enemies, kind of thing. And like,
Mhm.
there's a lot of parallels between like an action adventure game like Devil May Cry and a beat 'em up.
Yeah. In another positive thing we see in action adventure games is introduce an enemy who is immune to all the weapons that you had before, but can only be hurt by the thing that you just picked up. Or you have to avoid the enemy until you get the new weapon, and then you go back and beat that enemy up.
Yeah, or it could just be that not it's not immune to them. It's just very very resistant to a lot of your weapons before, and then your new weapon has its
Hmm.
weakness and can one shot it or two shot it or something.
Yep.
Or it could be that the enemy has like a shell, like a protective shell kind of thing. And to
Hmm.
break the shell, you need that new weapon. And then, after you break the shell, that new weapon really doesn't do anything to that weapon, but your regular weapons now damage that enemy kind of
Yep.
thing. There's
And
many different ways to do it kind of thing.
yep. And again, the beauty about Metroidvania design, why it's so difficult, is that it's really limited based on your imagination and creativity as a designer.
As well
If
as
you,
with action adventure.
yeah, like if you want to give the player the ability to create, a freeze things, and then we go even like crazy, and let's say you could freeze, clouds or water and turn it into, ice blocks you can then hit enemies with. Or you freeze an enemy and then you can, throw them as friends or use them as a platform.
Mm-hmm.
You want your tools, the more utility that each of your tools have, the better it is. And again, the world should be able to reflect that.
Here's a question for you: have you
Hmm.
ever seen a Metroidvania or a action adventure game, for that matter, that took a power and when it gives you a when it gives you a new power, it's not a completely new power. It's just more utility to an already existing power.
Mm, I know there are several examples. I just can't think of any like notable ones off the top of my head. Kind of like, well, maybe a robot named Fight could be in this regard. That there are several abilities that augment your basic gun. That you start with just like a general pea shooter, but then you can unlock the ability to, it becomes a laser. But then you could also get the power up that makes the laser destroy enemy bullets or go through walls or set things on fire.
I was thinking more of like a an ice power. You get an ice power, and with it, you're able to freeze enemies, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then you get another upgrade, and now you can not only freeze enemies, but you
Yeah.
can maybe
Freeze platforms or
freeze
freeze
platforms. And
fire.
then
Yeah.
you could get another upgrade that would take your freeze power, and now you can use it as an attack and freeze people to death and kill them.
Hmm.
And then you can get another upgrade that maybe makes it where now you can make your own platforms, kind of thing, with made out of ice.
Yeah. Kind of maybe like Trine did something similar to that in like the first game. That you could upgrade like your blocks or the various wizard boxes to have more and more functionality to them. And I know there have been games that let you expand the functionality of your powers. I just can't think of any like specific ones. Some games like to turn that into kind of the upgrade, like the passive upgrades. That once you've unlocked a power, that power gets its own skill tree. So like you can make your projectile shoot a double projectile, or it could shoot, it could stun enemies. It could freeze enemies. It could, weaken, lower their defense if they got hit. So the power itself oftentimes is not changing in terms of how you use it, but the various functions of that power change. I think maybe Smelter did something like that. That game that we played, I think it was earlier this year.
But the one I was talking about was adding functionality rather than
Mm-hmm.
not, adding utility, so that, you're doing legitimate different things with it.
Yeah. Again, I know there are examples. I just can't think of any off the top of my head.
Because, like, that would be a good way to get around some of the UX issues you had with having so many powers, kind of thing. Because, like,
Mhm.
if you had like 100 powers, but then you condense them to where each of those powers were like a sub aspect of one power, kind of thing, then you could do like so many things with that one button, kind of thing.
Yeah, I know there are examples. I just can't think of any off the top of my head that have done something like that. Like another thing that some games like to do is you get a move that, let's say, oh, I know, like you could also upgrade your dash. That, let's say, your dash is normally only used for defensive or utility purposes, but then you unlock the power that now your dash can break enemy shields.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can use that as opposed to having or needing a separate button or a, hold down your attack to then do a charge move kind of ability.
Yeah.
And again, like the nightmare about this is that it really comes down to just how far do you want to go in terms of your various powers and your tech.
As well as your imagination to,
Yep.
come up with the ideas and the game design and being able to balance everything.
Yeah. Like Web is a amazing. I don't know. Do we call that a action adventure game, a platforming game, a webbing game?
I would say it's a platformer, but it goes beyond platforming at the
Hmm.
same time. So I don't know. It'd be
Hmm.
kind of its own category kind of thing because it's a very unique game. But at its heart,
Hmm.
it is a platformer
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So here's a question: if you remember the game The Messenger that we played, I think this was 2 years ago. Would you consider that be action adventure or Metroidvania? Because it really, again, like straddles that line between the two genres.
Messenger.
Because it is a linear game, but they do introduce new abilities, and how you can move through the levels does change based on what you return to these levels with.
It is on that line, but I think it would go action adventure
Yeah,
because it does have a far greater focus on combat, and it's
combat.
also more room by room kind of thing rather than, and you're not really
Okay.
backtracking or anything like that. But the level design, you know, as in the individual level screens, are more platform based
Yeah.
than your normal metro than your normal poop action adventure. It's more
Hmm.
platform based like your Metrovanias, but I would say that's the point where it sides towards Metrovanias, but like every
Hmm.
other point I think sides towards action adventure.
Yeah. And action adventure games, all like we said, also have a lot of similarities in terms of finding health upgrades or ammo upgrades. And you do, like as we've said, like action adventure games is more about making sure the combat pops more than the general movement. Although probably better examples of action adventure games, like we said with the Devil May Cries and Bayonettas, it's also about making that movement feel really good. Like you want your character to feel like a badass, ducking and weaving or dodging and witch timing around the enemies.
Yeah, which both of those games definitely make you feel very badass. Like you,
Hmm.
especially when you know what you're doing, because then you really feel badass. Like I
Yeah.
remember my first time playing it, playing Devil May Cry 3, and like
Hmm.
like I was hacking and slashing and everything, and I was like, this feels pretty good. And then I jumped to avoid an attack, and when I jumped, I landed on an enemy, and I started skateboarding around. I was like, holy crap! And then everything took off from there. I was like, holy crap! This thing has a lot of movement tech.
Yeah.
Thinking
And
out of myself and just like, what else does this game have? And then I started playing around with it. I was like, holy crap! This feels really damn
mhm.
good.
And I think that is a really good point about kind of what separates action adventure from even the Souls like that we talked about on the previous episode. That in a Souls like, how you as the player fights, it grows based on your knowledge of the game. You're going to be doing things better, you're going to be reading enemies, more accurately. But what you do minute one of Souls like to how you respond, 8 hours in doesn't necessarily change. With an action adventure game or the better ones, just like with Metroidvanias, as you can pull more abilities and more tech in your routine, you get a lot more out of that combat system. Like you said, like with Devil May Cry 3, you can start that game just mashing square. By the end of that game, you can be, hit, knock the enemy up, switch weapon, hit them while they're in the midair. As they drop down, switch to your other weapon, continue the combo, knock them forward, switch to your ranged weapon, hit them some more, and get up to, triple S rank.
And then as they're falling down, you land on them and then use them as a skateboard to kill everybody else.
Hmm.
And
Like, the.
I think the big difference is when you're talking about like a Souls like, they're meant to be slow, they're meant to be precise,
Yeah.
they're meant to be make you feel very very weak, and you're always on the defensive kind of thing. Where an action
Hmm.
adventure is focused on making you feel really freaking powerful, and here's a lot of really powerful things that you can try your powers against, and
And
here's some
this
really
is.
powerful things that you can try your powers against, and just
Mhm.
feeling that almost power fantasy kind of thing, and just
Mhm.
really just kicking a lot of ass.
Yeah, and this is why when I looked at Doom Eternal, I said that it felt very much more like an action game than it did a first-person shooter. That there is tech in Doom Eternal, and there really wasn't tech in Doom, or even in like God of War 2018, and in Ultra Kill being another really big example of that.
Yeah,
I mean, Ultra Kill introduces new weapons and upgrades that then become part of your routine. It's not a case of, okay, you're using the blue sword, now you use the red sword. And the only difference is that the red sword does 5 more points of damage. In is a better Mega Man. Yeah, that could be an argument right there we could get into. In Doom Eternal, going from my shotgun to the Arbalest, it's a fundamentally different weapon. It handles completely different, and so does your strategy for using it. Just like in Devil May Cry 3, that the Rebellion sword is very different from the Cerberus, what was that, Trichucks.
yeah. And the the thing, okay, so like a lot of people are not going to like me for this, but like I'm personally am not a fan of first person shooters or third person shooters or anything like that because like I feel like design wise they're all the same. You know, they all feel the same. You're pointing and you're shooting. You know, nothing's really changing there. Where when you have like a Metroidvania or an action adventure kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just pointing and shooting. It's not just pointing and jumping. You have different ways you got to jump to do this stuff. I mean, there's not a different way to point and shoot. You know, you're
Yeah,
just pointing and
and
shooting, and that's what I really liked about what was that game you just said?
I was just about to say Doom Eternal and Ultra Kill.
Ultra Kill, yeah,
And Dread
Ultra,
Templar as well.
yeah, Ultra Kill and Dread Templar really, you know, like added so much to the game to
Mm-hmm.
where the feel is very, very different, and you're not just doing the same thing over and over again. Because, like
Mm-hmm.
in a first person shooter, you shoot somebody with a sniper rifle versus shooting with a machine gun, the only difference is numbers. You know, the numbers
Yeah.
of the distance that you can reach and the numbers of the amount of bullets and the amount
Yeah.
of damage. But they're exactly the same. You know, where like
Mm-hmm.
in something like Ultra Kill, there's like just so much different stuff you can do in there. And there's all this movement tech. You don't really have movement tech in first person shooters. You know, you don't it's just,
Mm-hmm.
you know, point and shoot, you know, point and shoot, point and shoot, point and shoot. Versus, you know, having the movement tech, having different weapons,
Mm-hmm.
having stuff that actually does stuff differently, and it gives that more visceral feel that is not
Mm-hmm.
samey. And you know, like I loved 007 when I first played it. I dearly loved that game, and
Mm-hmm.
but I played it and I put several hundred hours into it, and then every first person shooter after that has just felt like
Mm-hmm.
this is 007 with different aesthetics. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is just a mod for 007. This isn't a different game. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't want to play it. I've already played that game. You
Mm-hmm.
know.
And I think like this is where we can really like put a pin into what is different between an action adventure game and a Dark Souls or a Souls like. That at the end of a fight in a Souls like, it's kind of like a moment of relief. It's like, oh, the boss is dead, I survived. At the end of a fight of an action adventure game, you should be pumped up for whatever is next. You know, when you finish a room in Ultra Kill, you're not supposed to be feeling tired. You're supposed to be feeling, buzz and ready to go do it all again. The same thing with Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. Like, this again is, I think, what really, another point that may be controversial is that I just did not like the gameplay of God of War 2018. I felt it was too slow, was very cumbersome. And again, it felt more like a Souls-like rather than an action adventure game. Like I
Yeah.
didn't feel like I was a badass controlling Kratos.
Yeah. And to Mike's point, do you count Halo in there? Because I did not like Halo because it felt just like 007.
There we go. Good. We pissed off the God of War fans and the Halo fans, all in the span of 3 minutes.
Well, if I didn't ever play 007, I would have probably liked Halo. But I wouldn't have liked any first person shooter after that because I would have played Halo to, a absurd degree and then not liked, it would have been like, well, 007 is just a crappy version of Halo with, with worse graphics, and like all these others are just, Halo with different graphics. It all becomes the whichever one's the first one, at least to me anyway, gets all the enjoyment, and all the others are crap because I've already played that game.
Wait, don't you
Where
mean that 007 is your favorite Metroidvania and Halo's just a horrible Metroidvania?
but back to
But
Metroidvanias kind of thing, yeah, at the end of a boss fight in Devil May Cry, or Bayonetta, or any of these other ones,
mhm,
you want to feel pumped after the end of the boss fight because you're like, yeah, I freaking did
mhm,
it.
yeah,
I beat that thing. Now I can do anything. And then you go into the next level with the new difficulty, and they're like, holy crap, these enemies are strong. Good
yeah,
thing I can do anything. And you use that to push forward. You're
mhm,
using adrenaline to push forward your skills. You're getting in the zone kind of thing.
mhm.
Not the auto zone,
Where,
though.
yeah. Whereas in a Souls-like or more like the slower paced games, it's more about just like, okay, I fought that guy, now I gotta be super careful for the next 10 minutes. Like, you can't run, you can't push forward in a Souls like, because again, fighting more than one enemy at a time is usually death.
Hmm. You could always put your strategy and just keep on running past the enemies and avoid them.
Yep. Which works in a lot of cases. And
And I feel like that really breaks Souls games.
yeah, kind of. Like, again, this is again why there is a difference between like action and action adventure style games and even to Metroidvanias. That you want people you want them to use your core gameplay loop. As in, if your game's about platforming and jumping, you don't want to put fill areas with 50 enemies at a time that distract from the platforming. Conversely, if you're trying to build an action game or an action adventure game, you want people to want to fight enemies. Whether it's intrinsically, as this is badass, I want to do it, or extrinsically, these enemies drop gold or souls or red gems, which will then let me get more badass power, so I can keep fighting these enemies and be cool about it.
Hmm.
You don't want it to be like, okay, I've killed 50 enemies and their only purpose was just to slow me down so I can now go back to moving around. Oh no, now I'm trapped in a room with 30 more enemies. Let me repeat it again and again.
Yeah. I feel like action adventure games is like the best genre to pair with like metal music.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
is
we've seen that with a lot of the action adventure games.
because it's all about getting your adrenaline pumping and keeping it going kind of thing. And just, although Ultra Kill did a really good job with that too.
Eh, Wait, so you don't want to
And
play an
and
action adventure game where it's just all smooth jazz?
Bayonetta did some of that, didn't it?
It was suddenly jazzy. Or how about soft rock? To Ollie's question, what Mega Man we considered? Again, I
Mega Man is
don't.
sort of its own thing,
Yeah.
but it is very much Metrovania adjacent kind of thing. It is very Metrovania-ish. It's also sort of action adventure-ish.
Mhm.
It's sort of in that um kind of same area where the messenger is.
Yeah.
Kind of
And I
blending the two.
yeah, and I think with Mega Man, the fact that you can play through the entire game, Buster only, at least for some of the Mega Mans, does kind of like keep it from, the Metroidvania tag.
Yeah, and the fact that there's no map exploring kind of thing.
Yeah. And yeah, you do need again like a Metroidvania is about kind of like that pseudo open world or maybe a wide space of exploration.
Yeah.
It's not about, here's level 1, here's level 2, here's level 3 and never will those areas ever mix or, have a valid reason to go back to them.
Yeah, I'm more confident now that Mega Man is the pretty much exactly where Messenger is. It's more of an action adventure game with Metroidvania aspects to it.
Yeah. But I would say the Messenger is definitely a more elevated take on that compared to Mega Man.
Maybe. I don't know.
But we are about an hour and a half in, so I think we can probably begin to wrap things up. What do you think?
Yeah, unless we missed anything.
We talk about action, we talk about action adventure, and of course Metroidvanias. I think we're good. Again, we did kind of touch into first person shooters, but first person shooters will be a part of another topic or a later episode.
Yep. We got a lot of episodes planned.
hmm So I guess to summarize everything for people just joining or those who just, fast forward to the end. Metroidvania design is about presenting a game that grows in terms of the player's ability to interact in that space, as well as having that space challenge them. If your game is just about giving the player more weapons or just passive upgrades, that is not Metroidvania design.
Yeah. And for the next cast, we're going to be talking about fighting games and beat 'em ups.
Oh, good. Love Hadouken's going to be going on there.
Were the Hadoukens coming from the fighting games or from the beat 'em ups?
Could be both. There were a few beat 'em ups that probably had a Hadouken style commands.
Yeah, the two do go very much in parallel with each other. That's the reason why they're paired
hmm
together.
Yep. And for people watching for this one, again, and then for action or action adventure games, these are more focused on making the combat feel alive and giving the player a lot of different ways to, well, basically come with as many different ways that you can to punch someone in the face and look cool while doing it.
Hmm.
And it is different from a Souls like that is more about a slower pace. It's more about combat being survival rather than combat being like a display or a spectacle.
Hmm. And and is there anything else? Are we ready to?
I think that's it.
Well,
And for those of you watching, again, if you have any questions or suggestions or whatnot, let us know in the comments.
yeah, and be sure to check out my new game that I'm currently working on, Neon Continuum, which you should be able to join the Discord and be able to play it if you join my Discord. And
hmm
Josh has his own Discord.
Yep. You will find links to everything down below in the respective videos. If you want to talk about game design and video games, join my Discord and be sure to check out all my books on design linked down there as well.
Also, check out both of our YouTube channels. You're obviously checking out one right now. Check out the other. And,
hmm
smash the lick button and lick the smash button on both of our channels.
Yep. If you want to catch these shows live, we do them Sundays at 4 p.m. ET. And I'll try to do at least some of my other shows during the week as well. I need to kind of reschedule things around those lines. But that is going to do it. So tune in next time when we talk about beat 'em ups and fighting games.
The question is, will I have to carry you or will you have to carry me in the beat 'em up?
Well, the question is who's going to throw a knife into the other one's back and knock them out from across the screen?
The question is who's going to lure a bunch of enemies into me and trigger me to die?
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to
Or
take all
we
the
call on
healing
each other's
items?
supers.
Yeah.
But that is going to do it. So everyone, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we simply are on science of games. And until our next show, Have a great night.
See ya.